Aw, man. I remember being 15 years old and listening to this album over and over and over again. Good old times. Hey! Hi, folks! I didn't know that you were watching, so this video is going to be yet about another nostalgic millennial talking about how great the 2000s were in terms of music. Now, just kidding. In this video, we're going to be focusing on Evanescence, the massive impact they had on the scene back in 2003, and most of all, we're going to be ranking all of their albums, including Origin. So, if that sounds cool to you, keep watching.
Swallowed up in the sun of my screaming, cannot cease from the fear of silent nights. Oh, how I long for the deep sleep dreaming, the goddess of imaginary light.
What's up? Welcome back to the channel. Now today, as promised by the title of this video, we're going to be focusing on Evanescence, the legendary rock band out of Little Rock, Arkansas that blew up in 2003 with their debut album Fallen, and was formed in 1995 when Ben Moody and amylee, both co-founders of the band, were only teenagers. And I don't think that to this day Evanescence gets the credit they deserve for what they accomplished in the early 2000s with their debut album. I mean, how trend-setting and impactful their music was, and also I think that they changed a lot of people's lives almost overnight, and they gave us some quite important lessons that I'm going to pinpoint just now. First of all, the idea of artistic integrity. Not compromising your artistic vision, especially if you think you have something really unique and special on your hands. Second of all, persevering until your vision finally comes true. Now, of course, these 2 points may be applied to many other bands. Many other bands had the merit of sticking to their guns and persevering and not compromising on their artistic vision. But what makes Evanescence unique to me is that they changed the musical landscape in a few different ways. First of all, the impact they had on women in metal and rock was quite important. Now, you gotta take into consideration that back in 2003, there weren't that many rock/metal bands with a female singer that reached levels of popularity that Evanescence did. I mean, sure, you could talk about No Doubt in the 90s, but to me, they were more of a pop/ska band, or Doro in the 80s with Warlock, but still, that's not the same level of massive popularity that Evanescence reached. And that brings me to my next point, which is, to me, Evanescence paved their way for the rise of other female-fronted bands playing a similar style of music. I'm not saying the exact same style of music, but a similar style of music. We're talking about symphonic metal bands like Nightwish, with Temptation, Lacuna Coil, and sure, you're gonna say to me, but these bands existed way before Evanescence did. Yes, I know that. But hear me out. These bands actually blew up in a big way right after Fallen was released in 2003. Think about Nightwish and their album Once, which made them basically a supergroup in 2004. And look, this is not a way of me trying to dismiss these bands, because I am actually a big fan of all of these bands I mentioned, Within Temptation, Nightwish, Lacuna Coil. But I am certain that in a world in which Evanescence hadn't existed, these bands would have struggled more to gain their fan bases. And we're going to touch upon this subject a little later in the video, so stay tuned. Now, let's give some context to the points I just made, starting with the first two. Now, Evanescence, before they landed on Wind Up Records, they had to go from label to label, constantly being rejected because they didn't fit a particular niche, or because of a female fronted thing that was a problem back then. But in the end, they ended up on Wind Up Records, and that was just the beginning of some major issues between the band and the label. And that was because the label wanted to transform Evanescence in something that was a little bit more marketable, especially for the times they were living in, which was the nu metal era, and where bands like Linkin Park and Korn were really huge. And so what they proposed to the band is that, okay, we're gonna publish your album, but you gotta include a rapper in each of the songs on the track list. Now, this led to a big argument between the two parties, and eventually Evanescence, true to their artistic vision, they said no and went back home and started their day jobs once again and thought, okay, this is the end of our dream. We had our shot, we blew it. But what happened was that 2 weeks later, the record label called Evanescence once again, and they said, you know what? We're gonna let you record your album. We're gonna publish your album. But there's only one thing you gotta do. You gotta have a rapper in one song only, and that's gonna be for the Daredevil soundtrack. In terms of the rest of the album, you can do whatever you want. We won't interfere, but there has to be a rapper on at least Bring Me to Life, which was this first single released, because we need it for the Hollywood movie Daredevil back then. So the band eventually accepted and said yes, and so made this tiny little compromise, and ended up selling millions with both Bring Me to Life and their debut album.
I'm gonna sit down this piano for one song. And I swear to you, it's not gonna put you to sleep. If it does, bring it. Keep throwing your shit up here. Because as far as I'm concerned, we fucking belong here.
Yeah, so I mean, this video, despite being from 2007, so in a time where the band was already well established, I think it really shows and sums up Amylee's determination, especially in the early days, and how she felt she belonged where she was. She belonged in the music business, in the music scene, and she was going to fight for every inch that she had gained. And not only that, she was not going to compromise her artistic vision for whatever reason. Now, before we get to the actual ranking of the albums, let me touch a little bit more on the last 2 points that I made in the video, and that is how, to me, Evanescence changed the way female-fronted bands were accepted and how women in rock and metal were accepted, and how they paved the way for the rise of other similar artists. Now, think of a time back before 2003. There weren't, honestly, that many female-fronted bands, if you think about it, especially in the rock and metal scene. Yes, you had The Gathering from the Netherlands. You had Guano Apes, which had quite a big success from Germany. You had Tristania, you had Theater of Tragedy. You had Lacuna Coil and Nightwish and Within Temptation, but they were still relatively small bands. Now, think about all the bands that started popping up after Evanescence blew up. And I'm going to give you some examples. Lacuna Coil released their seminal album, Come Alive, in 2002. And this album, when it was released in 2002, before Fallen came out, really didn't do much. But what happened 1 year and a half later is that radio stations started to pick up the song Heaven's a Lie. People started really, really liking it. MTV demanded a video. Lacuna Coil was called at Oddsfest, and it was a spiral of ascending popularity for them. I mean, all of this happened in the post-Fallen era. In fact, when this album was released in 2002, it didn't gain that much traction. I mean, also talking about another band, Nightwish, these guys released their seminal album in 2004 once, and this was a massive hit. Once again, This was 1 year after Fallen was released. Another example is Within Temptation with The Silent Force, and this was one of their best selling albums that once again came out in 2004. Now, I could go on with this list, and there are many other examples I could list, but I think that it shows to me that fans, after they discovered the band Evanescence, I feel that they really wanted more of that same genre. And that's why they turned to other bands that I'm not dissing them. They are absolutely fantastic. Nightwish, Within Temptation, Lacuna Coil, they deserve all the credit they got. And but I feel that in a world where Evanescence hadn't existed, maybe they wouldn't have had the same career that they did have. But I can't disprove my theory because I haven't lived in a parallel world where Evanescence didn't release their debut album, so I can't, of course, disprove my theory. But I mean, that's my idea. And if you think about it, a lot of the fans that listen to Nightwish also listen to Evanescence and or Within Temptation. So these bands mainly share the same fan base. And I mean, that makes sense. Even though Nightwish is more of a symphonic metal band, and Lacuna Coil more of a gothic alt rock metal band, and Evanescence something a little bit different. They're similar in genre. So yeah, I mean, these are to me the reasons why Evanescence were so impactful in the scene in the early 2000s. But without further ado, let's go on and rank their albums. Now, before you do that, please be sure to like and subscribe if you like the content. Also, tell me in the comments your opinion on Evanescence. Now, let's go on with a ranking and just a few things. One, I'm not going to include Synthesis because that's more of a compilation to me. I'm not going to include the EPs, just the studio albums, but I am going to include Origin, even though that was considered by the band more of like a demo and was released in limited amounts. But I think, it's just too good to be ignored. So I am going to include it in the ranking. So we have 5 albums to talk about. Let's go on with it. Number 5, my least favorite Evanescence album is The Bitter Truth. That came out in 2021, 10 years later after their previous album, the self-titled, that came out in 2011. Now, this album to me is an okay album, simply. I love the cover artwork, even though I don't think it fits Evanescence music. It reminds me more of like an emo pop punk band, but despite this, I love it. There are some killer moments here. I really like the song Wasted on You. I mean, I like the dreamy verses contrasted with that guitar, which almost sounds so grungy and abrasive in the chorus. And yeah, that's a great cut. Also, the album opens up excellently with Broken Pieces Shine. I love amylee's belting in Blind Belief, the last track. The more playful Yeah Right, with that great guitar solo at the end. Use My Voice is a pretty good song, even though it's very reminiscent of Tool's Swamp Song. The other cuts, honestly, I could take them or leave them, and that's why this album to me doesn't rank very high. To me, the real gem of the album is actually a bonus track you find in the special edition, which is Evanescence cover of Across the Universe by the Beatles. Check it out if you haven't heard it. Ah, damn it! When I was editing the video, I found out that this part was missing, so I'm gonna do it again. Anyways, at number 4, we have Evanescence, the self-titled from 2011. And I must say that this album, I was pretty hyped for it back then in 2011 when it came out. But looking back at it today, I wouldn't say it's stellar. But the reason why I'm ranking it a little bit higher than The Bitter Truth is that the standout tracks here really stand out and are some of the best cuts Evanescence have ever put out. I'm talking about the tracks Lost in Paradise and My Heart is Broken. These two are absolutely fantastic, but there are also some other good songs like The Change, the very rocking and heavy oceans. I love also the first track, What You Want. That is pretty good. I know amylee learned to play the harp for this album, and there are a lot of moments where you have the harp, like in the closer, Swimming Home. But to me, a lot of the songs here are kind of filler, and I'm talking about Sick, Erase This, Made a Stone. I mean, yeah, overall, it's an okay album, but it's definitely not one of her best, even though it's got some really great standout moments. Coming in at number three, and amylee will really hate me uh, because I'm going to say something she won't probably like, but to me, this is far superior compared to the two albums I just mentioned. And this is Origin, that was released in 2000. And to this day, now the band considers this more of a demo. And that's because a lot of the material was re recorded for Fallen. Not a lot of the material, but three or four songs were re recorded and ended up on Fallen. Also, this album was printed in a very limited edition. I think only 1,000 copies were distributed. In fact, I don't think, actually, I know this is not an original copy, but I do have an original copy because the band reissued all of its catalog on vinyl a few years ago, including Origin. So I have it on vinyl. I have an original copy on vinyl. But going back to this album, I think this is really strong. Yeah, I must admit that the songs like Whisper, My Immortal, that end up on the on Fallen and were recorded on Fallen were actually better on Fallen to me. Uh, but then again, you have Imaginary, which is so different from the version that ended up on their debut album Fallen, and it's so good that it really stands on its own. To me, I always can't decide which of the two versions I prefer, and Imaginary is one of my favorite Evanescence songs. But so if you never listened to the Origin version of Imaginary, uh, I really recommend you to check it out. You will find it on YouTube. It's not on Spotify. But anyways, the other tracks are really, really good. I mean, the instrumental that closes the album, Eternal, the abrasive Lies, Evanescence plays with some electronic in Away From Me. Then there's the classic, Even in Death, which was basically kind of an early classic for a band, even before they blew up. And Where Will You Go? And I love the Tender Ballads, Anywhere, which is a very soft and tender and heartfelt love song. And the other one, what really stands out, is Field of Innocence. I love how amylee reflects on the past and her longing and wanting to go back to the time where she was a child and when she didn't have to deal with the world as it is, as an adult. And there's the beautiful line, I want to go back to believing in everything and knowing nothing at all. And I think that's really, really beautiful. But yeah, overall, this album, or whatever you want to call it, is very, very inspired. Coming in at number two is The Open Door, released in 2006 and the sophomore effort for the band. And this, of course, was the first album without founding guitarist Ben Moody. Now, back in 2006, I must admit, I didn't like this album very much. And that was for mainly two reasons. One first reason was I was moving more into the metal world and listening mainly only to metal. And the second reason was that, this album is very different from Fallen. And when you're a teenager and you discover your favorite band in your teenage years, and and for me that was Fallen, you want that same band to repeat that exact formula and make that exact same album over and over again. And I was disappointed because this was very different from Fallen. I miss the gothic elements, even though some of it is retained on this album, but not as much. The writing here is much more elaborate and complex, and you could see how the Amylee had matured as a songwriter. But when you're a teenager, you don't really understand the concept of artists needing to mature and venturing into new territories and developing as artists, because you have lived in your world for so little that you don't really grasp the concept of growth, especially when it comes to an artist and music. So yeah, I was disappointed, but this album, through the years, grew and grew and grew to the point that I consider this almost a masterpiece. Yeah, the open door, the title really sums it all up, because it's Amy venturing into so many different territories. I love the mix between classical and rock in Lacrimosa. I love rockier songs. Weight of a World and Sweet Sacrifice are some of my favorite cuts from this album. The absolute gem that is Lithium, one of their best songs ever. I love the chorus of Snow White Queen. The electronics used in Cloud 9. I love the piano ballad that closes the album, Good Enough. Also, the dramatic and heart wrenching Like You, which is all about Amy Lee's sister who passed away when she was little. Um, I never really liked the single Call Me When You're Sober, to be honest. I think that chorus is way too sugary. Never dug it. I like the verses of the songs, the more rockier verses of the song, but that chorus never really grabbed me, even though that song is probably the big hit of the album. But anyway, this is like album is Amy Lee venturing in some new territories, and she delivered a really, really great album. But there can only be one number one, and that to me is Fallen, their official debut album that came out in 2003, sold 17 million copies, and made Evanescence big stars. Um, yeah, this album also granted them 2 Grammys. And I remember at the time I discovered the band through the video of Bring Me to Life. And when I bought this album, I was at first listen, I was kind of disappointed, because I was expecting there to be a rapper on each song, because of course I had heard only Bring Me to Life up till then. And yeah, I was kind of expecting, since I was more into like these bands like Linkin Park and Limp Bizkit back then, that there was gonna be like a rapper combined with Amy Lee in all of the songs. And going through the album, I realized that there wasn't going to be a rapper, and that was only a guest on that particular song. And yeah, so initially I was disappointed, but then I continued to listen to this album through and through and love the band for what it was and for the sound they had. And this was really one of the most important albums that shaped my teenage years. I mean, the songwriting here is incredible from start to finish. The singles were massive: My Immortal, Going Under, Bring Me to Life, Everybody's Fool, but also the deep cuts like My Last Breath, or I love the Gregorian chants in the closing songs, Whisper. There isn't a, a medium or mediocre song on this album. Every song is absolutely incredible. I know every word, every song, line by line, word by word. I saw them for the first time in 2004. In fact, in this little booklet, I still have my ticket from 2004, but I don't think you can read it because it's so old. It's 20 years old right now, so I think the ink has just faded away. But yeah, I mean, this album is incredible. Maybe my favorite song here is Imaginary. I love the lyrics of that particular song, where Amylee paints her own little world where she can escape away from the torturous reality of life. I love that line in the chorus: "In my field of paper flowers and candy clouds of lullaby, I lie inside myself for hours and watch my purple sky fly over me."
I linger in the doorway of a love clock, screaming monsters calling my name. Let me stay where the wind will whisper to me, where the raindrops as they're falling tell a story. In my field of paper flowers, candy clouds lying inside myself for hours. Watch my purple sky fly over me.
But not only that, Amylee ventures in some lyrics dealing about self-discovery, love, loss. There is an incredibly painful and heart-wrenching tribute to her sister once again in the song "Hello," which is, I think, the only song in this album which has never been played live. In fact, when I saw them live on this tour and on the Fallen tour, they played all the songs from this album except for that one, and I understand it because it's a very, very personal song to Amylee. Yeah, so this album is to me just perfect. The gothic atmosphere, Amy Lee's incredible voice, the hooks. Yeah, it's kind of easy listening too, so it would be like a perfect gateway album for someone to get into rock or into metal, and that was the case, I think, back then for millions and millions of kids, including myself. Um, so yeah, and despite being, quite catchy and easy listening, the artistic value and the artistic merit and the inspiration in this album are just stellar. It's an incredible piece of work, one of my favorite debut albums of all time. I know every song word by word. And yeah, so it has to be my number one. And that being said, this concludes this ranking. It's been another pretty long video, so I'm just gonna leave and say thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and comment down below and tell me what you think about Evanescence. And yeah, so without further ado, see you in the next video with lots more content.